Hello everyone and welcome to today's SANS webcast. FOR572 course update from the future. Where we're going, we don't need roads. My name is Carol, author of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Philip Hagan, SANS instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for Phil, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Phil.
Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate it. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I am absolutely certain that this morning when you woke up that this webcast is exactly what you've been talking about since the moment you laid eyes on the alarm clock. At least that's what I'm going to say to myself. So it's also great to see a bunch of names I'm familiar with. I'm not going to call everybody out, but seeing folks that are in here, both alumni and some folks that I believe are going to be showing up at one of our classes coming up. Very, very excited for that. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So the story we've got so far is our class, Forensics 572, was a completely new class, all from scratch, zero reused content. We launched that a couple of years ago, and what was interesting about this class when we first launched it and continue today, as I tell all the students in class, is we are what I call an applied methodology class. You know, one of the challenges we've got in the network forensic realm is it's a lot less directly traceable between one specific event occurring and then an artifact. It's a lot looser, so you have to really, like I say here, learn how to learn. That's really a lot of what we focus on, which makes it a lot of fun because there's so many different permutations of what network traffic might look like and what that behavior might have been that caused it to happen. It really gives us a lot of interesting latitude, I think. As with all the SANS courses, we do provide a lot of updates. We need to provide one major update per year and a number of smaller updates per year just to make sure that things are kept current as well as some other stuff. So that's really what we're here today to do, is kind of tell you what's coming in this next revision when that hits. We run the class very, very heavily, 20 per year all over the world. I just got back this past Sunday from teaching in APAC. I leave this Friday to go teach 2 in a row back in Europe. And then we've got a number of others coming up. And so a lot of opportunities for you to see us in our different venues and our different delivery methods, whether that be online or in person. We also, of course, have our certification, the GIAC Network Forensic Analyst, the GNFA. We've got almost 100 folks. I just checked a couple of days ago at the list, and I think our latest number was 769, 770, something like that. So we've got a lot of folks that are certified, and it's a very challenging exam, but it's a very good evaluation of the material and the approach that we have. So, you know, I don't get a whole lot into that in this webcast, but we do have that cert to back it up. We're also part of both of the SANS Master's program. So if you're not familiar with the SANS Technology Institute, that's what we call the EDU half of SANS. It's got 2 accredited master's degrees. So if you've got a GI Bill, you're able to take a number of our courses and work toward those degrees as well as graduate certificates. And I am very, very honored that the Forensics 572 class is an elective in both of our different curricula there. So let's talk a little bit about where we focus in 572. I've bucketized out the evidence that we typically examine our source data into 3 main categories. And, you know, there's a little bit of leeway and bleed over between these sometimes. But in an effort to keep it simple, I have put that into these 3 different areas. First of all, full packet capture. Of course, this is kind of seen as the holy grail. I actually survey all my classes, and very few organizations are doing full packet capture. That said, even if you're not doing that, it does give us a really good opportunity for exploring protocols. So especially in the academic situation, we can take a look at those protocols and identify exactly what's going across the wire at the time. And it gives us a lot of opportunities to learn how the different endpoint utilities and software are going to be using those protocols to communicate. If you do have the ability to collect that, whether it be on a strategic kind of enterprise-wide level or whether it be tactically, you know, maybe putting up a full packet capture system in front of a compromised host or a network enclave that you believe is compromised, gives you the chance to kind of focus that attention and give you really, really good deep analysis capabilities. That said, it's not the end-all be-all. I always take issue with people that say if I don't have full packet, I can't do network forensics, or people that only focus on full packet when they talk about doing network investigations, because there's a lot more. And probably my number one favorite place to go is going to be NetFlow. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later when we talk about some of the tool updates we have. But the NetFlow itself is great because it's just a very small, quick, almost a database record that lets you query information about the communications that have occurred in the past. There's absolutely no content, so although it's not completely free of legal encumbrance, it is usually a lot less contentious in terms of doing full packet capture. So NetFlow gives you a lot better long-term visibility. And then, of course, we can't deny the fact that logs, any kind of logs coming from our network devices or our infrastructure, can certainly give us a very good, long-term, rich understanding of communications. Maybe not as low level as you're going to get from NetFlow or full packet, of course, not full packet, but it does give us those critical artifacts of communication, which is a term that I use quite a lot, which basically gives us just any insight or indication about any communication that's occurred in that past. And these logs also happen to drive us toward other evidence sources, other data that we want to look at. Hey, look, here's an IP address that showed up internally. We didn't know that this was, exhibiting these behaviors that are being logged by maybe an IDS or a network security monitoring platform. And then we can go to that endpoint and get the endpoint data and start doing endpoint forensics on it. And as I mentioned, this field moves very, very quickly. This reason that we have our courses that are updated several times per year, we have to stay current. We don't have the luxury of saying this is the way we look at this, one artifact or this one file on a file system, like a shim cache or something. There's always new research being done, but I find that the network forensic realm evolves much, much faster. And that's because, there's new tools. We've got new means of analyzing traffic, and if you've got last year's logs and today's log file analysis platform, that's still very, very valid and valuable. And I'll get into a little bit about how that fits into our continuous IR model as well. In addition, the adversaries are humans. They're changing as well. Their tactics, their techniques, their toolings are changing as well. I'm actually reading a book right now from a former Navy SEAL named Jocko Willink, called Extreme Ownership, and he just on the way over here to do the webcast today, he's got a great quote, which is, "The enemy gets a vote," which I think is just absolutely key in what we're doing, is that we can have all the procedures and all the methodologies and tech that we want. It doesn't really matter if our analysis platforms work today. It matters what the attacker is going to do tomorrow. So the enemy gets a vote, and we've got to adapt to that, of course. In addition, technology updates a lot. Probably in the time we're doing this not podcast, but this webcast, there probably might be 5 new .coms that start up and shut down that did some, crazy new solution or some new protocol out there. And of course, a lot of these are going to be leveraging various communication pathways as well. But one area that I really want to focus on, and I'm going to apologize just a little bit in advance of, whether or not you like the term hunting, it's kind of the term that we're stuck with, and I don't disagree that it's largely a marketing term, but it's what's kind of taken hold. So we've got to kind of speak to that because it is a real thing, and I think it's actually very important. Namely, the concept of hunting is in my mind just, like it says here, a mature and continuous incident response process, which is something that a lot of organizations have been doing a very long time. Other organizations are still getting their hands around and getting a feel for how it's going to work for them, and that's okay. But my technical definition is taking old evidence with new intelligence or new procedures or policies or tools. Basically taking something that was collected a long time ago and saying, was there an adversary existing in our environment last year that we just didn't have the technology or the approach to identify at that time? Of course, real-time identification, that's going to be something that falls to the SOC, the Security Operations Center. We'll talk about that in the next 2 slides. We on the DFIR side are going to be looking at this after the fact. So that's really where hunting comes in. That's why in the SANS definition, the concept of hunting, whatever you might call it, falls into the digital forensics realm. And I mean, that's all great when you talk about it from a conceptual standpoint, but realistically, this is what we're looking at in terms of how that plays out. You'll see on the left-hand side, that's going to be the real-time. That's the defenders, the Security Operations Center. They want to find this stuff when it happens, but they can only do that if they have the intelligence in order to in order to identify that that behavior is suspicious or needs to be investigated. So that's why they become the consumers of threat intelligence. And then, of course, that's going to feed into some kind of platform, whether that's going to actually be a SIM or some other type of analytic platform. It's going to be doing something because there's just way too much data to look at in a manual fashion. You know, hunting is not, hey, I looked through the logs until I saw something funky. You know, this is going to be something that's more in a continuous process. And of course, that has to be enabled by collecting in the first place, which is where we talk about continuous monitoring. Of course, over on the DFIR side, this is when we kick in. We get called into action, of course, after something has already occurred, when there's been a breach, when there's been an incident, when there's been something, however you define those terms in your organization, something has happened, and that's really what we're looking at. And that's going to have, you know, endpoint or host-based forensic, whether that be a mobile device or, you know, a server or a virtualized platform, something that's an endpoint. Or you're going to be looking at the network side, the communications. Now, not only are you identifying that adversary and trying to, you know, scope and remediate and do all those things that fall into the DFIR realm, we're also now generating threat intelligence. And threat intel generation, right? The right terminology there is generation, because that generation feeds into the SOC. Because once we go back and identify something called hunting, then it generates indicators of compromise, and as it says here, TTPs and just some kind of signature. That's going to then feed into the real time, and then it's not hunting anymore, then it's operations. And of course, this kind of diagram, this is a fairly new one. We haven't really formalized it, and there's still a couple of kinks that we're working out, but it does line up really nicely with a lot of the classes that we have in the SANS kind of universe. And you'll see that that hits some in the security side, and on the lower left, you'll see we do have a future course. It did just get a name and a number, or a number at least. It's going to be SEC 555. I'm going to talk a little bit about the SIM class coming up soon. But you'll see that we, on our side in the network forensic world, are in the far upper right. You know, we're a part of the DFIR process, a part of the DFIR curriculum, therefore, but these all work together. And this is very important because, excuse me, because when we talk about people that we tend to see coming through 572, I'm not going to read off this whole list, but there's a lot of different walks of life, if you want to think of it that way, that come through the class, which actually makes it really fascinating because everybody in the you know, a given class has a slightly different perspective on what their day-to-day is. And that brings something different to the table. So whether you're talking about people that are doing pure IR, or you're talking about people that are bridging into the real-time kind of, you know, that bridge between the intel generation and consumption side, or whether you're talking about people who are, you know, knocking down doors and picking up bad guys doing bad things, these are all folks that have to understand the network implications of their investigation. I've never worked a case that didn't have a communication path of some kind, and that means it's some way, some form, you know, there's going to be some kind of network forensic perspective that's kind of brought into the mix. So really, really a lot of folks that we see come through, and I love to hear all their different perspectives during class, talking to everybody about what they do on the day-to-day. Which brings me to the update. You know, obviously that's why we're here for the webcast. This update I am absolutely stoked about. It's going to be a blast. We've got a bunch of new tools and methodologies that I'll talk a little bit about coming up, but I don't want you to think that it's a complete swap up, because it's really just an evolution on what we've done. There's a lot of new stuff, but we've overlaid those new methodologies and tools over the same scenarios. We've got the same great folks who are going to be teaching it, you know, down at the bottom. So we've got people that are listed off and, you know, live as well as virtual events around the world. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And our first class is going to be at the Cyber Defense Initiative, so SANS CDI, in December, and that's going to be in Washington, D.C. And every class after that is going to be using our new version of the material. We've got a bunch more in 2017. I'll give you a list of those at the end. But you will have lots of opportunities, and I would love to see you in class at some point in the next year. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to walk through some of the tools that we've got and some of the updates. And this is just going to be a brief overview, kind of to wet your whistle, if you will, about some of the things coming down the pipeline. Get some of the fundamentals off the list right off the bat. We've updated SIF Workstation. We are using if you're familiar with building SIF, we're using the new Bootstrap script. That Bootstrap is now based on Ubuntu 14.04. It is long-term support, so it's something that we'll be able to use for a very long arc, and it's going to retain security patches and such. And there's a whole bunch of stuff under the hood that makes this VM, what's the right word here? it just makes it a lot more pleasant, in my opinion, to use. There were some little nits here and there that the previous version, which is still great, and I actually still use it for casework in some cases that I started on a while ago, but the 1204 version had a couple of nuances that made it a little bit difficult for some folks. Most folks worked through it fine, but we've really gotten around specifically some of the VMware interactions on 1404. We've got the latest version, a custom compile of Wireshark that enables some features that we use in the class pretty heavily. I'm excited about this because the newest version of Wireshark will, instead of doing DNS lookups, it will actually pull DNS traffic out of the PCAP and use the results from those DNS requests in the interface. So it's a form of passive DNS utilization, which is pretty fun. And it's got a bunch of other things as well. Also, the other big one there is they have a new port-independent protocol identification. Try to say that 5 times fast. But this PIPI module is one that will let you say, hey, look, this is running TCP 443, but I know this is plain text HTTP, and it will let you more readily focus on that and not have to manually, via human review, identify that that's an alternate port protocol type path. We also have a new version of NFDump. Not a whole lot of feature increases on NFDump specifically, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some other NFDump related components that are now in mainline distribution that I'm already using in cases and very excited about. And we've included a bunch of other useful utilities. You know, LineWatch, Hal Pomeranz wrote this during class in Perl. It was awesome. Published it to his GitHub. Is able to look at sequential lines of output and find lines that are, let's say, differing by a specified percentage. Like, only show me lines that differ by 20% from the one prior. Really kind of cool, kind of like the watch command, but it's going to do that on a line-by-line basis. Another scratch and itch type of script is one that I wrote, Timeshift. I got tired of dealing with time zones being wrong in the log files that I was analyzing for casework. So I said, you know what, I solved this problem once, I solved it twice, now I need to write a script. So I'm never going to solve a problem 3 times. I wrote the script, I put it on my GitHub, and we actually include that in the course material now as well. And another thing that we're adding in, this is a little bit new, so it's kind of experimental, but it's something that's had some very good feedback so far. We are a command line heavy course, but I don't want that to be a distraction or something that people get hesitant about and kind of shy away from the course. I realize not everybody loves living at the command line. I do find that it's very valuable for a number of reasons that we address in the course and in the lab material. But in an effort to make the material more accessible for folks that are maybe not as familiar with the command line, I have a command that you could run that will optionally drop down text files from a private GitHub repository or Git repository that I run, and you'll get every single command that we use in the workbook, and you'll get that dropped to text files. So then you can copy paste those out. I realize it's not for everybody, so it's not something that's baked into the labs. However, if it's something that you would like to do in order to maximize your time on target with the lab time that we have in class, it's something that a lot of folks have been very appreciative of in the test runs that we did this with. And probably the biggest tool update that we've got is we have always had Logstash and an ELK VM, what has become ELK VM in the class since day one back in 2014, actually since before that when we had our beta runs. However, I have worked really extensively on a distribution that's an appliance-like distribution of the ELK stack called SOF-ELK, and it stands for Security Operations and Forensics ELK. And ELK, of course, is going to be that stack of Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which is really kind of this big data analytics engine. If you haven't heard of ELK, definitely go check out elastic.co. You can learn a lot about there. Just Google the word SOF-ELK, and you'll get a lot of information about what we've built into this VM. But this is a VM that I've created that's not just in class. This VM is something that I support outside of class as well. It is distributed in both VM appliance format as well as all the configuration files are in my public GitHub repository. We have a number of contributions that are there as well. Now, SOF-ELK, I'm just absolutely pumped about this because I use it on my daily life. We call that eating your own dog food. I don't know if you're familiar with those terms, but I dog food SOF-ELK on a daily basis. And it's really just been fun to see where people have used it already. And I'm not going to, I know there's a couple of people on the webcast here who have been using it in some pretty high profile situations. You know, it's been wonderful to hear their feedback on where this has worked for them and how, and I'm just absolutely excited to see this hit the main line and get used in the real world. Well, the new version that we got that's embedded into the class is pre-configured with a whole bunch of different log parsers, basically about 24 or so that I use on a daily basis. It can also be a NetFlow collector, so you can actually just stand up SOF-ELK, open a firewall port, and fire NetFlow specifically right now, version 5. Future version, other versions will be supported in the future, but it'll be able to accept your NetFlow. And it also has all those dashboards that are distributed too. Those dashboards are something that are also in the GitHub repository, and some of the secret sauce, and this is all in the repo so you can check it out, but the secret sauce here is making it so that this is field upgradable. You know, I'll talk about that in just a minute here, but this is something that you can go ahead and use the VM and run one command. It's just an update command. And it'll actually go out to my GitHub publicly, as long as obviously I have internet connectivity, and it'll bring down any of the newest configuration files and dashboards, and I custom built all of the bootstrapping required in order to make those dashboards work. There's not going to go into all the details on the webcast on how that happened, but suffice to say it was quite an exercise in creative problem solving, but it works really well, and it's something that I'm very pleased to bring. In addition, this VM and this distribution is rapidly becoming the go-to VM for a number of other SANS courses. And I want to take just a second to give huge props to Justin Henderson, who's writing SEC555. That's the open source SIM class. SOF-ELK is going to be the basis for the open source SIM class. And I've been working closely with Justin on some of his configurations. He's going to be dumping in a couple hundred configuration files into the VM. So we're going to handle hundreds of different log types, which is going to be a blast. The VM it's not the one that's in class yet, but the one that's publicly distributed that's a little bit you know, more bleeding edge, the developed tree, is supporting Plaso output. So you can actually run Plaso against disk image and send that into SOF-ELK, and then use SOF-ELK dashboards and collaboration tools along those lines. A lot of great things that are coming down the pipeline too. You know, this webcast isn't all about SOF-ELK, but I do want to draw attention to how we're using it in class specifically. It's going to handle the data types that you see up at the top. So syslog data, out of the box, ready to go. Web logs in a couple of different formats, excuse me, also ready to go, out of the box. Handles passive DNS, handles NetFlow, like I mentioned. Now, because we're in the forensics world, you know, the SIM model doesn't necessarily fit. I always have a hesitation of recommending tools that are required to be set up and fully operational before the incident happens. Because, I mean, that's great if you've got the continuous monitoring in place, but if your continuous monitoring doesn't happen to be tooled on the part of the network that was compromised, or if it was broken at the time, or if it wasn't deployed yet, or you're finding out that the incident occurred months ago before you had tooling set up, you're kind of out of luck. So I make sure that SOF-ELK and all of our processes that we discuss in class will allow you to feed it dead files. So you can take existing files and drop them in right on the file system, and it will handle that more typical incident response processing workflow, where you receive evidence and you can place it in. Great for consulting, great for law enforcement models. Also just in general, you know, if you're on the incident response staff and you get old evidence, you want to use your current new hotness with the process, we support that. And of course we also handle live ingest through a number of methods. That's how we kind of get the ability to operate as a SIM in some capacity there. We do provide dashboards as well. One of the big frustrations that I have with ELK in general is once you get it all set up, it really doesn't do much. So it takes a lot of time to invest to build the dashboards, and because we are controlling all of the data typing and field naming and such on the ingest side of our configs, you're going to be able to get the dashboards. I'll show you some of those as well, and those are going to be shipped with it and updated through the GitHub repository as well. We do have 2 labs in the class that are specifically built around SOF-ELK. So we've got one that handles logs and one that handles NetFlow, and it's they've really turned out well. Our test subjects, if you will, have really enjoyed both of those labs. And I'm just very pumped to get this more integrated to the workflow, because I've also seen a number of our groups competing in the capstone on day 6 who have used this as well. So really cool possibilities coming down the pipeline on where you can leverage this throughout the whole class. And here's a couple of those dashboards. And I realize this is kind of screenshot palooza going on right here. But we've got some summary dashboards that'll give you a high-level overview of what you're actually looking at. The one at the very bottom, most toward the left, is the web log dashboard. So it's going to have geolocation in there. It's going to have analysis of return codes and analysis of request methods, and autonomous system numbers is built in there. User agent string analysis, that's all built in. This one in the center is kind of the classic syslog dashboard modeled after a number of commercial platforms, but just designed to give you that quick, decisive insight to the content that you're feeding it via the logs. And then, of course, on the right-hand side is our a sample of our field listings. We've probably got about 300 different fields that we extract and handle. So we present that to you so you can do your analysis as needed for your own workflow. Let's see, I saw a question came in. So for previous, when this class, the question is, does anybody who's taken the previous class, already receive the new materials? You have to ask SANS registration on that. All I know is that this version goes live in December. But the SANS registration would be, the email address that you use to register for the course. Then the other question here, on demand will be updated. I'm recording this January at one of our events, and the January event will be probably take about a month to process, so it should hit on demand in about February. But of course, it's not all SOF-ELK all the time, even though sometimes that's what it seems like when I'm working on it and get really on a tear, which is great. It's a nice hardcore flow on that. But other tools we've got, another VM that's just provided is Moloch. Now, Moloch is a full packet capture and analysis and indexing platform, and it puts all of its data into Elasticsearch. So it's doing real-time collection, and you can feed it existing peak. That's once again a critical component for every platform that I use in the class, is it must be able to take dead evidence. Being able to do that, it then will index that content and put it into Elasticsearch, and it gives you really quick, decisive type of search capabilities. I have used this myself in both IR and continuous kind of capacities, and I can't name names because of NDAs, but I know of a couple of companies that are using this Moloch platform in fleet mode, where there are many, many, many different sensors and capture platforms deployed out in their environment, and they're collecting across at enterprise scale. Now, of course, that requires hardware, but the VM that we provide you is going to be suitable for most forensic uses and incident response capacities. It is session-based, and I'll show you a screenshot next on how that actually comes to pass. But where you see, for example, Wireshark is going to be very packet-based, Moloch is going to reassemble those sessions together, and it's going to give you an idea of a socket-by-socket, connection-by-connection type perspective of your traffic you'll be able to see. And there's an aspect of it that I'll be honest, I haven't had an opportunity to explore it too much, except a couple of proofs of concept, is they have an very, very good scripting engine called Wise, called, oh geez, now I'm forgetting the acronym. But Wise, W-I-S-E, it stands for like Weve Intelligence C something. I can't remember. It'll come back to me at some inopportune time later today. But Wise is actually a portion of the platform that allows you to do third-party lookups to do transforms. So, for example, I get an IP address in, I can look that up on maybe a block list, the various spam house block lists or whatnot. I can write my own transforms to do that, or I can write that to transform private data as well, so my own generated threat intelligence, for example. And this is just one very, very rudimentary example. It gets into a lot more detail, but everybody's pretty familiar with HTTP traffic, so it's something that will show you just the number of different fields that are being extracted in real time. So each of these blue links up at the top is a field that you can click on, and that'll build a filter. If you're familiar with, for example, NetWitness, similar kind of concept, not as polished an interface, I will admit, but it certainly gives you quite a lot of power. And then, of course, the content down below, you actually have the ability to add custom compression, decompression algorithms. It lets you do XOR against the content. So if you believe you've got an XOR exfil, you can actually decode that directly in the interface, which is pretty slick. So a lot of these features that you have, and this is going to be something that we rely on in the class, and I'll explain that lab in a minute. I also like Moloch because it's got this connection view that you see here. This connection view gives you the chance to see, well, not just which IP addresses are communicating, which it shows here, but I don't know, let's see if I can grab my pen. If you look at these two drop-downs that I've just underlined on the screen here in red, those two drop-downs actually give you the ability to do visualization mappings between any two fields that are extracted. So if you wanted to do source IP to HTTP user agent or destination IP to an NTP reference ID or any of these other things that are being extracted out of the content, you can actually map them, and it gives you a chance to see where your connectivity is and your centers of gravity. There's some really, really neat capabilities here that we start to explore during the class, and this is an area where really the sky's the limit because there's hundreds and hundreds of built-in fields that are being extracted, and certainly you can script your own as well. So how do we use this in 572? We provide for you a separate, fully bootable, again, an appliance-like VM that is ready to boot, ready to ingest. And during the lab, it's ready to, well, first of all, the VM is ready to load PCAPs from disk, but you can also enable the capture platform to maybe connect up to a live network interface. Of course, that requires authorization and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can do in the class, but suffice to say that if you did want to do live capture, it's ready for it. But the lab that we have in class does load dead PCAP, and we kind of explore not just the capabilities of the interface, but we also explore some of the content and actually use it in an applied case to say, here's the information that we're interested in, and extract some useful fields and information out of that content, and use the VM to identify the bad guy, so to speak, in the scenario that we provide for you. In addition, I mentioned the Day 6 capstone again here. All tools are in play for the capstone. If you've got your own commercial tools, that's fine as well, and certainly seeing folks use Moloch. I even had a couple, before it's even in the class, I even had a couple of very forward-leaning, bleeding-edge type students who have successfully used Moloch during the capstone. Very good impact that it had on their analytic workflow. A couple other tools that we'll touch on here, and then we'll, I'll also reiterate that any other questions that you've got, please do type the questions in the box, or you can put them in the chat if you want. Questions are preferred. I'll be happy to answer those as needed, and we'll have a couple of minutes toward the end for those as well. One of the other utilities that's provided in the new class that we use in the lab, and it's installed in the SIF VM, is actually NFCAPD. Now, going all the way back to the very beginnings of 572, we've always used NFDump for our NetFlow analysis. And NFDump comes with NFCAPD, which is a flow capture tool or a collector. And we used the evidence from that pretty extensively. It was really great because if you were going into that kind of incident response scenario where you have a compromised host or suspected compromised enclave in the environment, and you wanted to set up a collector of some sort, you can actually do that with NFCAPD, listening for flow probes from the network. Very effective in that regard. Excuse me. But one of the big challenges, and going back to my fundamental tenet of network forensic tooling, is it was very, very difficult to use NFCAPD, the previous version of it, in order to generate NetFlow based on the PCAP. So if somebody gives you that 20 gigabyte or 20 terabyte PCAP, how are you going to do the analysis? You're certainly not going to load any of those up in Wireshark, and probably not going to load most of those up in any of your other tools. You've got to figure out which parts of that large capture are interesting. So converting it to NetFlow is a challenge, especially because timestamps didn't match up. And hey, I'm sure this is no shock to anybody that can spell forensics. Timestamps are pretty critical. So if your timestamps don't match up on your different views of the same evidence, man, you're just lining yourself up for a world of hurt. Not fun at all. Well, fortunately, the newest, latest version has an experimental but very reliable feature called NFCAPD, and it does exactly that. It can read in a capture file, or it can even read from a live network interface, and then it writes out that NetFlow. That NetFlow is going to be something that you can then query, and it gives you real high-speed access. Just as an example here, whenever I get PCAP information in, whether it's if I'm looking at information collected in a lab or if it's in a case-based scenarios, I'm going to go ahead and convert that to NetFlow because it gives me very fast, much more decisive insight to what's going on in that traffic. I can query it in thousandths of a second to instead of looking at doing that over a period of minutes or longer in order to query. Question that came in that actually refers back to the previous slide, that before I go on, there's the question is what VM we use to launch Moloch. It's a separate VM. It was too heavy resource intensive for me to put into the existing VMs, and I didn't want to complicate them, so I gave you a separate one to do that, and it's actually working real smoothly. So there's lots more. Let's see, one second. There's lots more that's built into it as well. Bro has become kind of the darling of some folks in the both the network security monitoring, kind of the SOC world, as well as the forensic world. Bro is classically seen as an IDS, but they're not really an IDS. They are much more appropriately deemed a network security monitoring platform. And this platform is one that's going to give you, logs that basically summarize out a whole bunch of different fields as well. It puts them in text files, and it's very effective at scaling these up and identifying when when certain DNS queries have happened or when certain HTTP behaviors were observed and things like that. We have a lab that we've always used in class that compares both firewall and IDS evidence, and I've actually rerun that scenario. And same basic concepts, but now we're using Bro, and we're actually comparing and contrasting Bro with firewall logs as well. And there's a couple of cool twists because I regenerated the evidence. I kind of stepped it up based on some things I'd seen in a couple of cases, and some real fun things that I've bolted on to the new version of the lab. We're also pretty heavily using passive DNS, which is a utility written by Ed Felskal. You can get the links on this, from a bunch of different places. But the passive DNS utility is something that will actually create structured, standardized text records that detail the query and response of all DNS activity. Very good for profiling and broad-based kind of searching, and very good for hunting as well, or whatever you might call it. What's nice is because it's normalized, it's also ingestible into SOF-ELK. It's also something that you can query just with basic grep and cut and awk and other simple shell utilities. So very flexible way to query. And it's going to give you a chance to basically profile the whole environment, whether it be reading from PCAP or reading live, and find out what's normal. What are your 10,000 most commonly queried domains in your environment? You can do that with passive DNS. When does that change? And when it changes, you can get a better feel for those outliers. Again, baselines of normalcy, knowing what's normal, and then seeking the abnormal is absolutely key to that whole concept of hunting. Let's see, click through. Beyond just that, there are a couple of other methodologies. I talked hunting a bit before. We've been doing it, maybe we're the hipster hunters. You can take that a few different ways. But we've been doing hunting since before it was cool, before it was a thing. We've always had that as a pretty fundamental tenet of 572. And those baselines are what we're talking about. The network's a fantastic place to get baselines because we can use NetFlow, we can use passive DNS, we can use full packet, we can use any number of different possible evidence sources in order to identify that something is out of the ordinary. And this is an absolute key component of an effective hunting program, or just an incident response program, which of course is what we talked about before. So we're going to be able to continue that concept. We're also going to be using the workflow methodology of taking large, massive data ingest, whether that be PCAP or whether that be logs, and then distilling that down to something manageable in the form of PCAP. That's going to maybe be Moloch, or that's going to be deriving it to NetFlow or reading it with passive DNS. In the case of logs, that's going to be in the SOF-ELK VM, because I've actually had in my own SOF-ELK instance with a beefed up processor and RAM allocation, I've had this thing processing upwards of 300 million records just in a VM. I didn't even put that on SSDs. So there's definitely some scalability promise there that is going to help make sense of billions of pieces of evidence, which, if you've ever worked this, any typical forensic case in the last 3 years, you know that your problem is not a dearth of evidence, it's having an abundance of evidence and having to get through it in a reasonable amount of time. So before we break into questions, if anybody has those, please do feel free to type those in, because we are coming down toward the end here, and I want to make sure you got a chance to type those before we break for the end of the webcast. I'm very humbled and honored that our courses receive some great feedback. It truly is something that means a lot to me. It's my baby. Besides my 2 kids, it's my baby. So hearing people that are able to take this concept, the concepts we talk about in class, and bring them back to the work site and do it in the day-to-day. That's really why we do this. Every single SANS instructor is exactly the same. We love hearing from you, who are the people that are using this stuff on a daily basis. The SANS promise, I don't know if you've seen this in any of our marketing material, is that we want you to be able to use what we teach the day back on the job. And I kid Viviana, who's our marketing lead, who's on the webcast, and I tell her that we need to change it, because I actually had some students on like day 3 come in and say, holy cow, we did this thing on day 2, and I went back and I used it last night. I VPN'd back to the lab, and we used those methodologies last night. It was awesome. So, before the day you get back on the job, people are using this stuff, which is fantastic. And, that's a very strong mandate to me, that I want to keep this relevant, and I want to keep people saying I use this every single day, which is just an absolute blast for me. We take what we've done previously and we built on it. This is not a something that is like we got rid of stuff that was bad. We didn't. We just kind of reassessed what was the most critical, most important, hard-hitting stuff, and we focused our attention there, including and introducing more utilities and focusing our workflow around those utilities to get us to what I like to call getting to good findings fast. That's the key thing that we're after here, is getting to good findings fast, and I think that we're really going to be able to deliver on that this update. It's a 6-day class, and it is absolutely jam-packed. We go start a class to finish, and we just don't skip a beat. So come ready to learn. Come ready to just consume. There's definitely something for everybody, and you can get a lot more details on exactly what we've included in each day of the class. Go to the SANS CDI, Cyber Defense Initiative page, and take a look at our day-by-day breakdown. You get a real good summary of everything that's here for you in the new version. And here's the course list. I realize this is kind of long. These are the ones that are public. If you go to the URL that's up at the top, just add a /FOR572 to the SANS site, you'll get the latest, greatest list, and the dates and the locations and times are all here. There's new ones being added all the time. There's a few more that are in the wings that are not public yet. I can't talk about those. SANS gets to control when that gets released to the public, but there's a lot of these coming up. Don't pass up the opportunity, though. I want to give specific kind of props and kind of hope that you can join us in Las Vegas in January. Not only is it going to be nice to get away from maybe wherever you are that's a little bit cold, but it's going to be where we record for on-demand, which is a blast, because it means that we you get to see me mic'd up with a silly little ear mic, and then when you listen on-demand, if you when you're preparing for the exam, it's going to be kind of like when you go to a Pearl Jam show and you download the music from that show that you went to, that exact one. So it's kind of like that. So you get to be you get to be a part of the show, which is a blast. And no, you're not on the recording, but it's kind of a fun environment. So while this is up on screen, I am going to take a look at the questions that are here. So acronym questions. CTI is cyber threat intelligence, and IOC is indicator of compromise. So CTI just being the intelligence that we use to define threats. If you've seen that in the past, it may have been called indicators of compromise, and that CTI is expanded to a broader practice. In fact, we have a whole class around CTI. Indicators of compromise are going to be any kind of an artifact that's going to drive you to your attacker. Maybe that's going to be the IP address of their command and control server. Maybe it's going to be a modified HTTP user agent that they have to flag their beacons. Maybe it's just going to be an interval between 2 occurrences that's regular and predictable. So that's going to be those 2 acronyms. Is the Moloch VM available to download? Not at this time. I have not decided if I'm going to make that available. To be completely honest, it's a pretty straightforward installation process. So it's not something like SOF-ELK that requires the tooling, and it's a significant administrative load for us to maintain that. So I haven't decided yet, but that's something that is a pretty straightforward installation. Maybe that'll change. If it does, it's something that I'll announce on Twitter and any of the other DFIR mailing lists and things like that. But that's something that's still in the wings, not currently in the plans. Arrival date is SEC 555. I do not have an answer on that. I believe that this is something that's probably going to be in 2017, but please do not quote me on that because they'll get me in trouble if you quote me on that. That's my belief. I don't have any further visibility on that. I would say keep an eye on the mailing list because, again, especially given the association that we have with between 572 and 555, I'd expect that that's going to be something that is of very particular interest to the DFIR community as well. Let's see, any other questions here? I don't see any others coming in. Let's see. If you got any, please do type them in. You know, I'll be able to stick around for just a little bit. That's the end of the material that I've got. You know, I really hope that you can join us at one of our classes. It's a really fun time. You know, if you come to the conference events, it's great to kind of hang out and get to meet people and network. If travel budgets are tight, which I certainly understand they are, we've got a VLive coming up in February that I'll be teaching. So that'll be something that you can join us from home. Ends up VLive is 2 nights a week for 6 weeks in a row, so 3 hours a night, and you can do that from home. And we've got a number of other things that are coming our way. So if there's any other questions, please do type them in. If not, thank you very much for joining. I appreciate that. I hope that you got something out of the presentation, and stop by and say hello. Hopefully you can join us for class sometime. I will stay on the line if there's any other questions, but otherwise I hope everybody has a good day and a good rest of your week. And go forensicate righteously. Take care, everyone.
All right, thanks, Phil, for that great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. And I wanted to let anyone know that if you do think of a question later, or perhaps if you're listening to the recorded version, feel free to send it to q@sans.org. And for a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.